Today, let's make a handbag all from scratch. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today I'm going to try to make this bag that I drew out. So I have a bunch of different fabric scraps as well as some fake leather, and I really wanted to have this patchwork effect on both sides. So I cut out some squares, cut out some rounded edges for what I'm trying to get the bag to look like, and now I'm just going to be sewing all those pieces up to get it to have this effect and shape. Now for my sewing machine, since only one piece was the faux leather, I was able to sew through this pretty easily, and once I started to do one piece, I realized it was going to come out really nicely, so I just continued this for all of those individual pieces until I got those 3 rows. So this is what it currently looks like. Now what it was time to do was trim up a lot of that seam allowance, as I did a large seam allowance so I could make sure if there was any issues I would be able to very easily fix it, but I didn't want to have all that bulk for the final bag. Now it was time to match up the points so that I would have that really nice checkerboard effect, and with this, since the leather is very bulky, I made sure that the leather seam allowance was on one side, and then for the other piece it was on the other side. That way it wasn't as bulky overall, and I think this gave it just a really nice smooth effect for when I did the sewing. So then I just pinned it up for that entire row, and then I continued this for the other side and then just sewed it directly through. Everything was coming out so nicely. I absolutely love how it turned out. So now it was just time to add the top of the bag on to the other 2 rows. But again, I was going through, clipping all the seam allowance off to make it nice and small, and making sure that everything was the exact same measurements all the way throughout. Now it was just time to sew on the final piece of the side of the bag. So here is what my bag is looking like so far. I absolutely love both the front and the back. So now it is time to really start building out the body. So for this, I knew that I wanted to have a piece at the bottom that kind of had this, like a larger effect on one side, and then it kind of narrows as it goes up. So that's why I tried to do this in like a mirroring effect. And then I also would need a piece that would be on either side for the zipper. So I wanted to use the black leather for both the zipper as well as the outside portion, just to give it a little bit more sturdy of a feel. So you can see I have 3 different pieces cut out, one for the bottom and then those 2 for the zipper at the top. Now I also need to make sure that I had handles, so I used a tape measure to see how long of a piece of leather I was going to need, and once I got that measurement, ended up being around 20 inches or so, I did cut out 2 pieces from the leather for the handles as well. Once I had this cut out though, I was then complete with cutting out different pieces for the outside of the bag. Now it's time for me to start pinning up the zipper. So of course, since this was leather, I used quilting clips just to make sure I wasn't damaging the fabric. So with right sides together, I matched the outside of the zipper with one piece of the leather, and then I'm just going to take a seam all the way down that one side, and then I will be repeating this for the second side of the zipper as well. So here you can see I'm just going to take a seam right down where those quilting clips are, and then what I also did was, for the handles, I saw that there was a way if you added cording in the middle, it kind of gave it a little bit more of a substantial feel. So I played around with seeing how this was going to work. I did pin this up using my quilting clips just so that I could see if I liked how thick it was, if it was going to be too thick. And overall, I did end up adding a second piece of cording in there just so that it would have a stronger feel overall and not just feel like a floppy piece of leather. But it was time to now go try and sew everything up. So first step was to sew on the zipper, which I had no issues doing this. It came out really nicely, especially, like when you go through and top stitch it. And then I did do a test swatch for the handle idea, as I wanted to be sure I wasn't going to really be damaging my fabric. So once I had the zipper all complete, what I did was I put 2 pieces of cording into this tiny piece of leather, and then I'm just going to sew this up, see if it works. Since I am going to be sewing onto the leather itself, I used a different foot. So instead of using the metal foot, I ended up using this plastic foot, which helps it slide a little bit better. I'll do a whole video on different feet that you can use when sewing leather in case that is of interest. I found this worked really well though, and I didn't have any issues with it sticking along the way. So once I had that on, I just went through and sewed up the leather. It worked really well. Like, I was surprised that this technique did work so nicely, and I think it did give it the feel that I was looking for. So now with this complete, I am able to trim up some of that extra leather off the side. Since leather does not fray, I'm not too worried about over time it starting to fray or peel off or anything. And as you can see, they're bending really nicely, so I think this is going to work perfectly for a handle, especially if this is a larger piece of leather. So I am super excited to get to use these, and I will now be able to just do the full size handles and be able to move on to the next steps of the bag. So with the zipper done, it was now time to focus on the full construction of the outside of the bag. So I measured around how large the bag was to get an understanding of how big of a piece I would need for the bottom as well as the zipper portion. The zipper portion was going to be staying the same. I didn't need to cut it down, but I knew the bottom I may need to cut down a little bit. So what I did was I took the bottom portion of the leather I cut out, and then wherever I had my zipper, I'm going to match these so that the short ends are matching, and I'm just going to take a seam directly across there. And then I used my sewing machine, and at this point I was still using the presser foot I'd used for the leather just because it was a little easier. So now that I had that done, it was time to try to attach this to the front of the bag. So I was able to see how large it was going to be all the way around, and then I saw how much I still needed to remove. So I just pinned this all the way up using my quilting clips to get an understanding of how big this was going to be, and I am just going to be taking a seam all the way around. This was such an exciting part because it felt like the bag was really coming together, and here it is. It looks so good. So now that I have this completed for one side, it is now time to redo all of those steps for the second side. So the zipper is able to open, we're going to be able to get inside the bag, and then I will be adding a lining. So all of these like seams are going to be hidden, but now I was just able to pin on the second side, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. Be sure if you are kind of following along with these steps that you do have your zipper open for this, or else you're not going to be able to get back into your bag. So with that said, I had it all sewn up, and here is what my bag looks like so far. It looks so cute. I love how it turned out. So I did go ahead and top stitch the bag. I probably did not need to do this, and I could have done it when I added the lining into the bag, but I went ahead and did it. So now it was time to start working on the lining. I cut out all the pieces the exact same way I cut them out before, so that's why I didn't include this. I also did add this little pocket just so I would have it for the inside of my bag, as you normally do get little pockets, you know, like when you have a handbag. So I added this, and then I'm just sewing this up right now, very similar to how I've done before. Then this was the portion of the bag. I did kind of go through this quickly just because I found it a little boring since it was very similar to the outside portion of the bag, but I added my pocket into the bag lining itself. So I'm just going to be taking a seam on either side so that I can get that really nice effect to make it look like the pocket is sort of like hidden into the bag. So I just took a seam to add the pocket into the lining for the one side. The other side of my bag is going to be looking exactly the same, so there's not going to be any differences with having to add a pocket. It's just going to be a piece of fabric. Then, similar to how I did the first one, I did go through and top stitch the zipper so that it would lay nice and neat. When you're doing this, be careful you're not sewing into the pocket itself, so you just want to kind of adjust your fabric on either side. Once I had all of this done, I decided to add some interfacing to my bag so that it would be much sturdier, since the cotton I used was very, very flimsy. So I just cut out a piece of interfacing for both sides of the bag, including that side that had the pocket on it, so that everything would lay nicer and not be as flimsy. Now the interfacing I was using was iron-on, so I just went through, I ironed all my pieces. So as you can see here, I'm actually ironing the pieces that are going to be attached to the zipper, as I wanted to make sure that they were nice and smooth. And then to make this easier for myself, I did fold this over about a 1/2 inch so that when I'm attaching it to the zipper, there's no raw edges being seen, and I did this for both pieces that are going to be attached to the zipper. So this is what it ended up looking like. It had a really nice look to it. I actually really like how this fabric looks. And then I did add the interfacing to both of the sides of the bag, and then I just started the process of sewing it all up. So this is the exact same process that I had done for the exterior of the bag. I'm just doing it for the interior, making sure that I'm able to get everything to line up nice and smooth so that it can then go inside my bag and I can have it all be completed. This ended up really not being too hard since it was exactly the same steps that I had done before. I already knew what I was looking for and what sizes I needed them to be. So once I had the one size complete, I just completed the exact same steps for the second side of the bag, took that seam all the way around, and here is the lining of my bag. So it looks very similar to the exterior of my bag, except I'm not turning this right side out. So I did trim up some of the extra fabric and clip some of the curves just so that it would lay a little nicer, and then I put this inside my bag, and now it was time to attach the lining to the exterior. So this is where I was talking about that I probably made a mistake top stitching the leather already, because if I had not done that, I could have just sewn all of this in one seam. But because leather does show once you kind of go through it, I did go ahead, I pinned all of this up using my quilting clips, and I hand sewed the entire thing. So I just made sure the lining was going through the zipper and not the actual leather itself. So this took some time, but it did work and it did exactly what I needed to. It looks so nice. So the last and final step is to add the handles onto the bag. Now I had gotten a little leather kit. I will include a video of the unboxing, and I used that to have sturdier fabric to go through it, but overall this turned out so well. I'm in love with this bag. What do you think? If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me what you want to see next.